Welcome to the deep dive. You know, if you or someone close to you has been through IVF, it feels like this incredible feat of science. It's so technical, so precise, almost miraculous sometimes.
It really is.
But then when a cycle doesn't work out, it's like hitting a wall. You can feel like a complete mystery, right? Everything seems perfect. The embryo looks healthy, but no implantation. It's just so frustrating, often because the reasons aren't obvious.
Yeah, it absolutely is frustrating. And you've really pinpointed the core issue we need to unpack today. When we look at the sources, the breakdown often isn't some big mechanical error. It's usually much more subtle, maybe a cellular thing, a misalignment.
Okay.
So we're diving into what might be the most common silent saboteur in IVF success: hormonal imbalance. It's this clash, this miscommunication between chemical messengers, and often it starts way before the actual IVF procedure.
Right. So our mission today is really to shine a light into that black box. We want to understand how this delicate network of signals your hormones can clash, leading to problems with, say, egg development or the timing, or maybe most importantly, how receptive the uterine lining is.
And, let's try to frame this positively. The goal here isn't to overwhelm you with problems. It's actually about identifying targets, things you can discuss with your doctor. Because when specialists can pinpoint these specific hormonal conflicts, they can adjust the treatment plan, the protocols, and that can significantly boost the chances of success. So knowledge really is preparation in this case.
Okay, let's get into the nitty-gritty then, starting with the reproductive hormone team. IVF, essentially, is trying to manage and optimize the body's natural monthly cycle, that symphony you mentioned. So who are the key players, the conductors?
Yeah, we're basically talking about a feedback loop, and it's all coordinated by something doctors call the HPO axis. That's the hypothalamic pituitary-ovarian axis.
HPO axis, okay.
Think of it like the main traffic control center, managing signals between your brain and your ovaries. If those signals get mixed up, well, the whole system can kind of stall.
I like that traffic control. So who are the hormones actually driving the cars in this system?
Okay, first up, you've got FSH, follicle-stimulating hormone. Think of it as the recruiter for your ovaries.
Recruiter.
Its job is to wake up the ovarian follicles, those little sacs holding the eggs, and tell them, okay, time to grow, and also to start producing estrogen.
Right. Growth and recruitment.
Yeah.
Got it. And its partner hormone.
That would be LH, luteinizing hormone. So while FSH gets things started, LH is kind of the trigger.
Ah, the trigger.
It's responsible for that big surge, the famous L8 surge, which in a natural cycle causes the most mature egg to be released from the follicle: ovulation.
And the result of FSH is recruitment drive.
Yeah.
Estradiol, right? The main type of estrogen.
Exactly. And estradiol plays a couple of really critical roles, especially when we're talking about IVF success. First, it gets to work thickening the uterine lining, preparing that landing strip for an embryo.
Okay, building the lining.
And second, when estradiol levels reach a certain peak, it sends a signal back up to that HPO traffic control center, basically saying, hey, we're ready for the LH surge now. So it's like the body's internal timer.
So estradiol builds the nest and sets the clock. But for implantation itself, the real gatekeeper seems to be progesterone.
Oh, absolutely crucial. Progesterone comes from the corpus luteum. That's what's left of the follicle after the egg is released or retrieved in IVF. Its whole mission is just stabilization.
Stabilization.
It makes sure that uterine lining stays thick, healthy, and really receptive. It creates the perfect supportive environment for an embryo to implant and for the early stages of pregnancy. But if that whole HPO axis gets disrupted, maybe by stress or other factors, then those four key hormones just don't get clear instructions.
Which brings us neatly to the usual suspects, those underlying conditions, the systemic clashes that can mess up the whole system before IVF even starts. And I guess we have to begin with the big one. Polycystic ovary syndrome, PCOS.
Yeah, PCOS is incredibly common, and the sources really emphasize it's much more than just cysts on the ovaries. It's a whole hormonal environment, typically marked by high androgens, those are often called male hormones, and very often insulin resistance. That's key.
Okay, let's break down that clash for listeners. How does high insulin actually interfere with, getting good eggs?
Well, high insulin is often the main culprit in PCOS. When your insulin levels are consistently high, it directly affects the ovaries. It basically triggers them to produce too many androgens. It's an overreaction.
Right.
And these excess androgens then kind of overwhelm the system. They disrupt that delicate FSH-HLH balance we talked about. Essentially, they stop the follicles from maturing properly. This often leads to irregular periods or no ovulation at all. That's an ovulation.
So if someone goes into an IVF cycle with that kind of high androgen, high insulin environment, the eggs they retrieve might already be compromised. And the body isn't really primed.
Precisely. So the solution isn't just throwing more reproductive drugs at it. It often needs a more specialized approach. Doctors frequently need to tackle that root metabolic issue first, maybe using insulin sensitizers like metformin or different kinds of stimulation meds like letrozole to kind of quiet things down metabolically before they even start with the powerful gonadotropins used in standard IVF. Managing blood sugar essentially becomes part of reproductive treatment.
Interesting. Okay, beyond the ovaries, what about those other systemic players like the thyroid and the pituitary gland? They can throw things off too, right? Sometimes without us even knowing.
Oh, definitely. They're like silent directors backstage. Untreated thyroid problems, whether it's underactive, hypo, or overactive hypergesterin, they directly mess with how your body produces and uses estrogen and progesterone. And the sources are really clear on this. If your thyroid isn't managed, it can impact both the quality of the eggs and how receptive the endometrium, the lining, is. So your TSH and FT4 levels really need to be checked and managed, often with medication like levothyroxine, well before starting IVF stimulation. Otherwise, you're kind of setting yourself up for a potentially poor outcome.
Okay, that's thyroid. And the pituitary gland can sometimes produce too much of this hormone, prolactin, like an emergency brake.
Exactly. That's hyperprolactinemia. When prolactin levels are too high, it basically suppresses the signals for FSH and LH. It's the body's way of saying, hold on, now's not the time to reproduce. Maybe due to high stress, certain medications, or sometimes a small pituitary issue.
How would someone know?
Often the signs are irregular cycles or maybe even milky nipple discharge when not pregnant or breastfeeding. That's called galactorrhea. It's a definite red flag. But the good news, it's often very treatable. There are medications called dopamine agonists that can usually bring prolactin levels down pretty quickly and get the cycle back on track.
Okay, so we've covered some major internal disorders. Let's shift gears a bit to factors maybe more in our daily lives, lifestyle things, environmental stuff that can knock our hormones out of whack, particularly cortisol and sex hormones.
Yeah, the big one here is chronic stress. Our bodies, well, they don't really know the difference between running from a tiger and stressing about a deadline or finances. It all registers as a crisis.
Right.
And that ramps up cortisol, the main stress hormone. High cortisol basically acts like, as you said, an emergency brake on that HPO traffic control center.
How does that brake work specifically on the reproductive side?
Well, cortisol directly competes with hormones like progesterone. It also interferes with the signals coming from the brain, like GnRH, and it can slow down the pituitary's production of FSH and LH. Basically, the body flips into survival mode and puts the reproduction project on hold. So recognizing that link means that actively managing chronic stress isn't just, a nice to have, it's a tangible step towards balancing the hormones you absolutely need for a successful IVF cycle.
And we also need to talk about weight, right? Body fat isn't just passive storage. The sources say it's hormonally active.
Absolutely. Fat tissue contains an enzyme called aromatase. And what aromatase does, simply put, is convert certain precursor hormones, often androgens, into estrogen. So if someone is dealing with obesity, that extra fat tissue is constantly producing extra estrogen.
Wait, but didn't we say estrogen builds the lining? Wouldn't more be better?
You'd think so, but no. Too much estrogen actually tricks the brain. That artificially high level signals back to the HPO axis and tells it to suppress FSH production. The body thinks, oh, we have plenty of estrogen, the cycle must be finishing up, so it stops follicle growth too early, which isn't good for egg quality. Plus, this often goes hand in hand with the insulin resistance issues we talked about.
Okay. And the flip side, being significantly underweight.
That also triggers the emergency brake. Insufficient body fat, or sometimes really intense excessive exercise, signals starvation or extreme stress to the body. It responds by suppressing the entire reproductive signaling pathway, GnRH, FSH, LH, leading to what's called hypothalamic dysfunction. It can shut the whole cycle down, so balance really is crucial.
And quickly, what about those hidden disruptors, environmental toxins?
Yeah, the sources point to endocrine-disrupting chemicals, or EDCs, things like BPA in some plastics, chetholates found in cosmetics and plastics, certain pesticides. These chemicals can actually mimic or block our natural hormones, especially estrogen and progesterone.
How does that affect IVF?
They basically confuse the body's signaling. This can potentially lead to lower egg quality or problems with fertilization. So trying to minimize exposure, maybe using glass containers instead of plastic, filtering your water, choosing organic foods when possible. These are controllable steps you can take.
And simple things, like coffee or alcohol.
Definitely. Things like excessive caffeine, generally thought to be over 200 or 300 milligrams a day, and alcohol can disrupt how your body processes estrogen and progesterone. They can also contribute to raising cortisol. And don't forget basic nutrients like vitamin D. Deficiencies there can impair hormone regulation too, so getting levels checked and supplementing if needed under medical guidance is often part of IVF prep.
Okay, wow. We've mapped out a whole landscape of potential hormonal clashes. Now let's connect the dots directly. How do these systemic imbalances translate into specific points of failure during the IVF cycle itself? This is the IVF collision course.
Right. The first major collision point is often during the ovarian stimulation phase. If you have underlying issues, say untreated PCOS, or maybe high FSH indicating lower ovarian reserve, or that unmanaged thyroid condition, your ovaries might just show a poor response to the stimulation meds.
Meaning they don't produce enough eggs.
Exactly. The gonadotropins, those FSH medications they give you, just can't overcome the underlying hormonal conflict. This is why personalization in IVF is absolutely everything. A standard one-size-fits-all protocol just won't cut it if the body's internal environment is actively fighting against it.
So even if the doctor uses the right drugs, if the internal hormone balance isn't right, the eggs you get might not be optimal.
Precisely. You need that specific hormonal milieu, that delicate balance of FSH, LH, estradiol to mature eggs properly. If that balance is off, you're likely to end up with a higher proportion of immature eggs or eggs that are compromised in some way. And that obviously lowers the chances of successful fertilization and developing a healthy embryo.
Okay, so that's egg quantity and quality. Then we get to the next big hurdle, implantation failure. Let's say retrieval went well, fertilization happened, the embryo looks good under the microscope, but it just doesn't implant in the uterus.
Yeah, this is heartbreakingly common. And while there can be other reasons, it very often comes back to a problem with the landing strip, the endometrium, and progesterone is usually involved. Okay. Low progesterone levels after the egg retrieval can lead to something called a luteal phase defect, or LPD. Essentially, the uterine lining, which was built up nicely by estradiol, becomes unstable or maybe just isn't receptive enough because there isn't enough progesterone to hold it all together and make it welcoming.
But wait, doctors give progesterone supplements in almost every IVF cycle, right?
Yeah.
Gels, injections. Why isn't that always enough?
They do give significant support, absolutely. It's standard practice for a very good reason. But the lining's readiness isn't just about pouring progesterone on it. If the underlying systemic environment is still really off, maybe due to untreated hyperprolactinemia or ongoing thyroid issues, the lining itself might still be resistant, or just lack the right cellular structures to respond properly, even with all that external progesterone. It's about the quality of the receptivity, not just the quantity of the hormone.
I see.
And sometimes imbalances in estradiol can also be a problem, leading to a lining that's too thin or just not properly developed.
Okay, this really underscores the core message, doesn't it? Understanding these hormonal factors isn't about causing fear, it's about empowerment. What's the main takeaway here?
I think the key takeaway is that many of these hormonal clashes, these conflicts, are actually measurable, and often they're manageable. The real solution lies in early, thorough diagnosis. Before even starting an IVF cycle, reproductive endocrinologists need to run those crucial blood tests, FSH, LH, AMH, estradiol, TSH, prolactin, maybe others, depending on your history.
Right.
By identifying these potential conflicts before selecting a treatment protocol, they can tailor the approach. Maybe that means managing insulin resistance first, or getting thyroid levels stable, or adjusting the stimulation type and dosage. This kind of proactive, personalized strategy is probably the single most powerful tool we have against otherwise unexplained IVF failure.
So stay informed, stay positive, and really understand that preparation and careful monitoring are your best allies on this journey.
Absolutely. And of course, we have to state this very clearly. The information shared in this deep dive is strictly for educational and informational purposes only. It does not constitute professional medical advice. For any medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment, you must always consult a doctor or another qualified healthcare provider.
And if you want to find more information about the complete IVF process, you can find it on the portal, ivfforme.com.